Operation Truth. The show they don't want you to see. Now, here's your host, Lou.
Well, good afternoon, good evening, or good morning, depending where you are in the world. And my buddy Tom is about, I would say, 12 hours later than we are. Tom Fuentes, who's going to be joining us shortly. You may have heard me reference Tom before. He's a former assistant director of the FBI. I don't even know if the word distinguished applies. I almost said extinguished, Tom. Distinguished applies because his career has been so vast and so diversified, and he's so knowledgeable that you're going to have the benefit of listening to him and his insights shortly. But I want to start out as I normally do and remind everyone, this is not a politically motivated broadcast. We're not trying to tell you who to vote for. We're not trying to tell you what to think. What we're really trying to do is give you food for thought. We're trying to tell you the truth, something that's left the conversation today. We just really are not that concerned about the truth anymore, and we're going to delve into a couple of issues that are going to speak to truthfully. You know, I want to remind everyone that if you had been listening to a prior broadcast in the form of Between the Lines, you'll know on a weekly basis, I've spoken to this border issue, and I just conservatively ask, acknowledging that our government has acknowledged 5.5 million people having crossed this border illegally on the South alone. We're not even talking about people who have overstayed their visa stays, which used to be the mechanism in which people violated our immigration laws most of the time, or our northern border. We're going to speak to the 5,500,000 illegal immigrants here. Who is supposed to benefit from that? I'm just curious. I've questioned that. I've mentioned the fact that the taxpayers are going to burden this. I've mentioned the fact that for whatever reason, we seem to lack the decency and morality and guidance to take care of our own people first. And I'm not saying turn your back on anyone. That's not what I'm saying. We need a migration process intelligently executed. I'm asking these questions, and they require a truthful answer. Now, I will tell you something you're going to find rather interesting. If you listen to Eric Adams, the current mayor in the city of New York, who a few months ago was welcoming everybody, open arms, and boasting about how New York takes care of everyone, suddenly he's changed his tune. He now has approximately 7,000 migrants that he's having a problem housing. In addition, he's identified that it's costing the city about $4 million a day. He's now engaged in an exercise where he's attempting to move them himself, much the same way he accused governors of moving migrants to his state. He's trying to displace them to contiguous counties like Nassau, Suffolk, and up into the northern tier of New York, Rockland County, and throughout upstate New York. He can't afford to house them. He doesn't have places to house them. To his credit, being a Democrat, he's challenged the migration policy of this president, questioning why cities like New York, Chicago, LA, and even some Texas cities, why they're under this duress. Why isn't the government doing something as opposed to letting them come in tens of thousands? Apparently, they come in at about 200,000 plus every month. I know in New York City, it's being reported that they're arriving at the Port Authority bus terminal located on 8th Avenue and 42nd Street, about 900 a day. I'm just asking a very simple question. I invite anyone that wants to engage in this exchange with me with civility and decency and respect, something that's also left our conversations. Who's benefiting from this? Who's benefiting from this rampant crime in our major cities that are driving all of these businesses, most recently Westfield Malls and AT&T in San Francisco, causing AT&T shut their retail store? Walgreens has pulled out. A myriad of these companies have pulled out. I don't want to be critical of Gavin Newsom, but in an interview I saw with Hannity, who I'm not a big fan of because he's just too damn disrespectful and critical of the president. There's a way to criticize people. It should be done constructively, not in a demeaning way, and not with a ha 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 every time we catch you with your foot off the bed. Because believe me, having been in law enforcement like Tom and I have, we were both police officers. Before Tom went into the FBI, he was a police officer in Illinois. You make mistakes every day. It's about learning from them and forging forward. Another concept that we've abandoned in the country. But independent of that, who's paying for this? You know, we have our homeless people in New York City questioning, what about us? We're building these complexes in Brooklyn, flat screen TVs, video games, cuisine to their liking. They don't want to go. They want to stay in the posh hotels in Midtown Manhattan. That what's being reported in the news, and they say a picture's worth 1,000 words. They're being trashed. I'm trying to figure out who's supposed to benefit from all of this. The taxpayer, the society in general. What people really don't understand, and I can speak to it literally because I come from New York City. I'm familiar with all 5 boroughs, of which I was born in one and grew up in another. The Bronx, where I'm not, I don't have any real strong ties, is like the breeding ground for the criminal element. Hey, let's send them up there and make them the criminal element. You can't make this up. We need a little clarity in our thinking is all I'm suggesting. I could speak to you ad infinitum about this, but the bottom line is, let's stop criticizing. Let's offer solutions. Let's start introducing into the conversation some civility and some decency and some respect. Let's change the agenda. I'm not telling anyone that you should necessarily go out and support Robert F. Kennedy, but he's of a different space and time. He's reminiscent of his uncle John Kennedy, who was assassinated, who Tom is incredibly knowledgeable of that assassination. And I hope one of these segments we get to delve into that with him. And his father, who were conservative Democrats. He's wondered what happened to the Democrat Party. That's not me saying it. That's a Democrat saying it. We got a lot of problems hamstringing the country, whether it's the borders, our major cities, our economy. I'm trying to figure out this deal in the Ukraine. We have allocated about $115 billion to this country. Look at the people in this country living in indigent circumstances. It crosses all racial lines, ethnicities, religious denominations, cultural backgrounds, and even lifestyle choices. We're so preoccupied with taking care of everybody on the planet, we don't take care of our own people, our veterans, our homeless, our mentally ill, our children, which is really the driving force behind this broadcast. We can't sit here idly by and not address this. And I make this simple. If you're comfortable with going on with your border, then support whatever political entity is furthering that. If you're comfortable with your major cities empowering the criminal element to act with impunity, then continue to support that, which ironically, that's what happened on November 8th in our major cities. Can't explain it, although I can, attached to the abortion issue and the fact that Donald Trump remains in the conversation. If you believe this is okay, no problem. If you think shutting down the Keystone Pipeline the first or second day into this administration that translated to your gasoline prices at some point doubling, continue to support that entity. I'm not telling you who to vote for. I'm telling you see the forest for the trees. I'm telling you separate your politics and your agenda from your children. Love your children more than you love your politics and your agenda. That's all I'm asking you. If you think this economy is on the right track and spending $6 trillion we don't have, continue on your path. I don't know what to say to you. Our foreign policies are troubling. I don't know where this got blurry about what happened in Afghanistan. And I listened to them wanting to lay this off on Donald Trump. You know what the worst part about that is? That's a lie. Trump, in his maniac way, threatened them in Afghanistan, and Tom will further this in the discussion because I know he's knowledgeable of this, that if you deviate from this agreement, and it was echoed by Mike Pompeo, the Secretary of State, we know where you live. And tragically, that works in the real world. I know people live in a bubble and they think everything's done out of books. It isn't. It's done in real time, moment by moment. A lot of times you get to make it up as you're going along. Our foreign policy left these women and these girls back in the hands of the Taliban, just inexcusable. We gave them so much promise, which they were pursuing. I don't understand why we couldn't have left 2,500 soldiers in Bagram, which would have kept the lid on things. Everybody's testified to it, including our generals. What happened here? Guys, we have a problem in the country. But really what the problem is that our media, who carries your narrative and creates your optic, has chosen to be political entities. And they skew everything you hear and you see. They're not journalists anymore. I'm really having a hard time quantifying what they are. Bottom line is we need to change this conversation and redirect the energy of this country and try to galvanize this country as it once was under the Kennedy administration. Now, I do want to point out something interesting. You guys, you can see I'm just taking you everywhere. The population of this country since John Kennedy was the president has doubled. Don't listen to this 335 million because that's simply just not true. Many people do not even participate in the census. Not to mention, if you're acknowledging 5.5 million having crossed the southern border of this country, excluding the people that overstay their visa stays, which is normally the majority of the people that violate our immigration laws, and you're not counting in the people crossing the northern border, we're probably looking at 10 million plus right there. I would say conservatively, we're pushing 360 in this country. I have a bigger question. Do we have a certificate of occupancy in the country? Or are we hell-bent to become India and China? Did we not learn from the mistake of overpopulation? We're not taking care of the people we have, folks, and we're adding to the problem. I can continue on like this with you all day long, but I'm not pointing the finger. I'm asking for everyone to put their swords down and start to become part of the solution, not further the divide and the polarization in this country. I do want to speak about something else that's critically important today. It has to do with the fact that the media has you thinking the house is on fire. Guys, I'm going to stick with the 335 million people that the census has identified. I'm not going to go beyond that. 1% of that is, let me see if I get this right. 1%, 0.5% of that, 335 million is 1,675 people. 1,675 people. This country would be unmanageable if we had 1 million people every day up in protest and dissent and disrupting this culture. And Tom will tell you this himself because this has been his background. You know, we think in the house burnt down. The problem is they're exploiting the fact that the vast majority of us are too distracted taking care of our kids and trying to figure out how to pay our bills, mortgages, car payments, insurance, food. You know, the average American doesn't know what to do about this unless you go near their kids. Then they discover this word called recourse, which we're not going to get into today. We're going to talk about this whole phenomenon as to what's going on the minute you step up on our children. Guys, I want to tell you something, not to entertain you, but to just give you something to think about. In the mid to late 70s, I didn't live in Studio 54, but I was a frequent visitor. I had a really interesting life. I'm not going to delve into it. It's not really relevant, but I was there. When you went to the bathroom, you needed a scorecard to keep track of the players, and nobody cared. 50 years later, we're having conversations about transgender people. Well, this is simple to me. If you possess a male anatomy, you don't belong in a women's locker room. I don't care who I'm offending. It's not designed to offend you. It's designed to put up boundaries. You are harming our children. You are threatening our women, whether you understand it or not, whether you're doing it subliminally or intentionally. I really don't care. It all translates the same way. These girls are uncomfortable in sports today. Why don't we just make a place for the transgender people? Their own sports, their own bathrooms, their own locker rooms, whatever it takes. We seem to have enough money to throw around the globe, the countries that are adversarial to us. Let's make a play at it, guys. We'll take a quick break, and I'm going to bring in Tom Fuentes. As I mentioned to you earlier, Tom is a former assistant director of the FBI with an incredibly distinguished career. I have to tell you, I've learned so much from Tom. I always say this to people. I love smart people because they teach me. Tom has taught me a lot, and I come from his background. But he's had a really interesting avenue in law enforcement, independent of him being a police officer, where you amass an incredible amount of understanding about this culture. I'll be right back with you guys. Stay with me.
The world is in crisis, with political unrest and financially unstable countries trying to print their way to prosperity by taking on trillions of dollars of new debt. It's incredibly concerning. That's why you need to own silver as a hedge. So call today to receive the free hard asset information kit on how easy it is to own silver. Green energy demands will possibly turbocharge silver prices to 50, 100, even 300 an ounce, according to many experts around the world. Silver is a proven hedge against inflation. Since 1971, silver has returned over 11% when averaged yearly. Silver is a proven wealth preservation for hundreds of years. Hard Asset Management is a trusted leader in precious metals and rare coins for nearly 40 years. We have the guaranteed lowest prices, fast and easy ordering, expedited shipping, with award-winning customer service available 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. CST, Monday through Friday. So protect yourself from the chaos. Invest in stability with Hard Asset Management. Call now and get your free Hard Asset Management information kit on how easy it is for you to own silver. 844-426-4653. 844-426-4653.
We're back, ladies and gentlemen, and I want to introduce Tom Fuentes right now. And Tom, I know that this is very early for you. I'm not going to disclose where you are because it's no one's business. If you choose to do that, that's your prerogative. But I do want to ask you about what's going on in Russia the past couple of days. What's your opinion of that? And it's being alluded to, Tom, that our intelligence community knew that this was going on. Care to comment?
Yeah, they probably did. I mean, we have all the satellite coverage of the troops that are in Ukraine or at the Russian border. And, we've been following the Wagner group and his leader, who's, very outspoken. But to me, I don't think this was a real coup. When they talk, members of the intelligence community talk about it had all the hallmarks of Russian disinformation. Well, if this was a real civil war in Russia or a real coup attempt on the part of the leader of the Wagner group, how come they're not dead? How come they weren't wiped out by the Russian military if they were attacking Russia? So, in a way, it looks to me like a phony operation or what's referred to as a false flag, where Prigozhin, the leader of the Wagners, Putin, maybe not deliberately, planned this together, but kind of, I think they went along with this or created the impression of the coup just to rile up Western media, just to make all our pundits, go crazy and Russia's falling apart and they're in chaos and all that. Where's the chaos today? Where are the dead insurrectionists in Russia who led this coup attempt, if it was a real coup attempt?
So Tom, if I may, Tom, if I may, sir. So you're questioning even if this was legitimate. You're thinking this is something that could be staged. Is that a possibility?
Yes, I think so.
That's interesting. Tom, do you have any knowledge of the number of troops that allegedly participated in this coup, quote unquote? I heard as many as 25,000, and I heard as few as 8,000. Both are significant numbers. But what's your intake on this?
It's hard to tell because I think that it's hard to get an accurate media picture of it. I think our intelligence agencies have a pretty good idea exactly. We have, Russia blanketed and Ukraine blanketed with satellite coverage, so they can count every vehicle, every piece of artillery, every soldier that went across the border and went to the one Russian town that was apparently invaded. And you see the soldiers standing around laughing and talking, and the citizens coming up and talking to them. So you don't see that the Wagner group is truly anti-Russian. And if anything, they're fairly patriotic to Russia. This is not a mercenary group, which are just soldiers for hire, like you find in African countries, that any soldier of fortune from any country, doesn't matter where they're from, and they're not loyal to the country where they fight for that country. They're loyal to the money they get paid. The Wagner group doesn't exhibit that. They appear to be Russian patriots. And I think that we know exactly how many went, why they went, what was going on. But our media and everybody wanted to exploit it because we're trying to find something good news. Ukraine's going to win. Ukraine is going to upset Russia. Russia can't handle it.
What about, Tom, not to interrupt you, sir, but what about as part of a ploy to distract us from some very nagging issues in our country, such as this issue with Hunter Biden? Like, I don't want to get political, Tom. You know how I am. You and I are Americans first. Our allegiance and our allegiance and our loyalty lie there and with our children. But this thing with Hunter Biden, this is an interesting way to distract us from that for a moment, But I did want to say something to you, Tom, and correct me if I'm wrong. And I'm curious to know what your assessment is. The media references them as mercenaries. So are they being incorrectly depicted?
Yes, I think so. They're actually Russians.
Interesting.
Kind of put together as an independent, almost like we would have a militia in the United States form, especially, in older times. And I think that they just don't appear to be anti-Russian or that they were attacking Russia or that they were going to overthrow Putin or any of that. That doesn't show any of the characteristics of that type of group that were, anti-Russian authority.
Tom, can I ask you this question? You referenced the intelligence community and their ability to monitor, for lack of better terminology. Clearly, the FBI participates in that because that would ultimately translate to providing information domestically that the FBI might need to protect us here. Is that a correct assumption for the listener?
Well, in a way, but the different agencies of the United States intelligence services, it's a little bit of a different situation. The FBI does not have control of the satellite assets or the military assets that are in place right now in the Ukraine or in the Ukraine versus Russia war that's ongoing. So I think that, I don't think the FBI is right in the middle of the knowledge base of that. But the military, Department of Defense, along with CIA assets and satellite assets and all of that, are very much aware. These guys, the Russians are capable of it, Chinese and US intelligence. They can read a license plate off a car from outer space. So that's the kind of sophistication they have. They know exactly how many Russian soldiers, how many Ukrainian soldiers, how many other soldiers, if you will, the Wagner Group. They know how many there are. They know where they're at. They know what they're up to. And they just don't appear to be trying to overthrow the Russian government.
So, Tom, let me ask you this, if I may, because on prior podcasts, we've identified and disclosed the fact that you headed up the international operation for the FBI globally, the coordination of its efforts in offices and personnel. So what does the FBI do when all this is going on, the intelligence community and all these pieces to the puzzle are shifting, and incidents like this Russia thing with this militia, non-militia group?
The FBI makes it very clear to the host countries that allow the FBI to open an office and conduct operations that the FBI is not going to conduct law enforcement operations independently from that country or espionage operations at all. The FBI mainly provides a service to those countries, helping them if they're working investigations that come into the U.S. and if the U.S. wants assistance in investigations there, they try to work together and have a relationship. And the FBI has an office in Kiev, Ukraine, and has had it there since I ran international operations. And I had to retire, mandatory retirement 15 years ago. So we've had a very successful office there, a very great relationship with the Ukrainians. And in fact, this past year, Ukraine was going to host an executive conference for the FBI in Kiev for the FBI, for the graduates of the FBI's National Academy at Quantico, who are police executives that have attended the FBI's 11-week advanced course for senior officials. And then, of course, the war broke out and that had to be canceled. But so the FBI has been in Ukraine and many of these countries and has good relations with their services. And they have requests for the Bureau, and it could be training, it could be investigative assistance, it could be other forms of assistance. And it kind of works that way. The FBI does not even have an office in a country if that country doesn't allow it to. We have to have their permission. They have to vet every single agent or analyst or linguist that we put in that office. They clear them to be allowed to work in that country. Our State Department grants them country clearance to be there on an official basis. But when they're there, unlike some of the other members of the intel community, they don't work independently in that country or against members of that country or even other enemies of that country. They work side by side in many of the cases with the host country services, usually their law enforcement services. So the FBI tries to make it clear that in the United States, the FBI does have intelligence operations and authority to do it, domestic security, but not overseas. And we guarded that very carefully. When I ran the program my last 5 years in the Bureau, we were very, very conscious of not allowing agents to go off the reservation and do what they wanted to do or go do investigation or any of that.
The world is in crisis, with political unrest and financially unstable countries trying to print their way to prosperity by taking on trillions of dollars of new debt. It's incredibly concerning. That's why you need to own silver as a hedge. So call today to receive the free hard asset information kit on how easy it is to own silver. Green energy demands will possibly turbocharge silver prices to 50, 100, even 300 an ounce, according to many experts around the world. Silver is a proven hedge against inflation. Since 1971, silver has returned over 11% when averaged yearly. Silver is a proven wealth preservation for hundreds of years. Hard Asset Management is a trusted leader in precious metals and rare coins for nearly 40 years. We have the guaranteed lowest prices, fast and easy ordering, expedited shipping, with award-winning customer service available 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. CST, Monday through Friday. So protect yourself from the chaos. Invest in stability with Hard Asset Management. Call now and get your free Hard Asset Management information kit on how easy it is for you to own silver. 844-426-4653. 844-426-4653.
So, Tom, if let me ask you this, buddy, then. So is it safe to say, I'm asking you this question, is it safe to say that our FBI and our domestic security mechanism is dependent upon the intelligence community solely? You know what I mean? In other words, Tom, I think what you're alluding to is that we may have an office in the Ukraine, but we don't have one in Russia. That's for certain. We do have an embassy in Russia.
We have a legal attaché office in Moscow since the 1990s.
The FBI does.
I visited, yes,
Yeah,
I visited
the
that
FBI.
office many times. We have close relations with the FSB. One of our assistant legats there was actually had worked with Putin when he worked for KGB and the FSB. It later morphed into when he was in charge in St. Petersburg. So essentially, Putin was like an FBI official in Russia and ran the St. Petersburg operation of the FSB, Foreign Security Service of the Russian Federation, which is basically similar to what the KGB was. When the KGB broke up at the fall of the Soviet Union in 1992, the functions that it had were divided into several other agencies. So they have military intelligence, and they have the Security Intelligence Service, and then they have police, which is the MVD, Ministry of Interior. But the FSB is the most closely aligned with being like the FBI, and we worked very closely with them all these years.
And so, Tom, you work with the FSB, which is you're saying is what Putin was attached to, correct?
Yes, he ran their St. Petersburg office before he became named to be head of the country.
Give us an example of something that they might collaborate on. You know what I mean? In other words, it's almost like an oxymoron having the FBI investigate in Russia, because I'm certain that they attempt to surveil any and all communications that come out of the Bureau.
Oh, absolutely. Right? But the FBI is not investigating on its own in Russia. So they're working with the FSB, sharing information.
Is it productive, Tom? Does it turn out to be something
very productive? And the Russians provided us extensive information on terrorist organizations because of, some of the countries or some of the...
Tom, I've got to go to a question with you right here, buddy, because you just tapped on something with me, and it busted my bananas to go to a break, which I will. But I want to go back to this Russian collusion story, that if we had an asset, for example, in Moscow, and we had this relationship with FSB, if there was any Russian collusion, wouldn't that be something that we would know about based on the fact that we had this asset in Moscow? You understand where I'm going with this? Because we're hearing a whole lot about this, and I really didn't intend on going off on this tangent about this, this Russian interference thing, which has since been disproven. But wouldn't they have been able to verify it that way, Tom? That allegation?
Well, to some extent, but not to the extent you think. And some of the countries where the FBI has offices in 80 countries outside the United States. And they vary.
Who does, Tom? Say that again, please. I'm sorry. Who does?
The FBI has attaché offices in 80 offices overseas. Now, in some countries like Canada, we have 3 offices in Canada, but many of the countries we might only have one, or we might have one office, like in South Africa, that covers 14 countries in sub-Saharan Africa. But the countries vary depending on the relationship that we have with them on what you're allowed to do. But for example, if we have an investigation and we think that there's some fraudulent activity being operated out of a particular office or a particular residence in Russia, and let's just say, the FBI legal attaché or his assistant or other people in our office happen to drive by that location, they don't look at it and send a report back to FBI headquarters and say, okay, I see that it's an operating business. It's actually a legitimate address. We don't even do that to even give the appearance that we might be doing investigation on the ground. We give the lead to them. Would you please help us by identifying if this residence or apartment or office, whatever, is legitimate or a vacant lot? And then they do the investigation. That way, we're not risking appearing to be out doing surveillances or verifying information on our own. Everything is done through liaison basis with these countries, and some countries are stricter than others. Now, I was starting to say that in Russia, for example, some of the provinces, when they broke up in 1992, became independent, like Ukraine, Belarus, some of the other ones, Belarus. However, some of the provinces did not get to be free, like Chechnya. And Chechnya, for a long time, had a number of terrorists operating there, and there was a connection with some of them back to the United States. But they had conducted bombings. They did the Opera House bombing in Russia. They did school bombings. They did a number of terrorist attacks against Russia. They wanted to be independent, and basically Russia crushed them. There was no, due process and all of this. Russia is not a gentle state, but they put an end to it, and they shared a great deal of that intelligence with us, who they identified as members of Chechnyan terrorist organizations, and vice versa. If we picked up information, because some of them, would have family members in the United States or seek asylum in the United States. So we had a great deal to offer each other in terms of intelligence, and that's basically how these offices operate. Now,
I want to mention something to the viewer, Tom. Not to interrupt you, I apologize, but guys, what you're listening to is someone that had his hand on the throttle. This is not secondhand information. The gentleman you're listening to was responsible for coordinating all the international efforts of the FBI, the coordination of the offices and its agents. That's why Tom is capable of speaking so literally to what's going on over there. And I found it interesting. I just learned something from Tom today, because if someone had asked me, did I think the FBI had a presence in Russia, I would have said no. And Tom just volunteered the fact that we have an operation in Moscow. Guys, we're going to wrap it today. I want to thank Tom for all of the insight, input, knowledge, and opinions. And a lot of this is opinions, guys. I want to be candid with you. We're trying to give you some food for thought. I do want to say something to you. There is no substitute for the truth, and the truth has no political affiliation. That's what I'm going to close with today. I thank you for joining us and for listening. And I thank Tom and everyone else that's participated in this production, TJ Stone and everyone else that's built in around this thing. And I also want to thank Brian Williams for helping create this platform, because he's really brought this thing into some structure.